Welcome to what is the final training on the Cambridge Young Learner exams. This one is on flyers and it's at A2 level. Once again, we will go through all the exam, which is what we've done in starters and movers. We'll make suggestions for what you can do in each part of the exam. And then separately, we will provide resources that you can look at so that you've got pretty much everything you need. I'm not saying that you shouldn't get a book. The books are great out there, but yeah, just in case you want to rely on this, I think you can. So you will notice at flyers level, if you reflect back to starters, that there's a really big difference in terms of language competence, one being pre-A1 and this being A2. So as a teacher, you look at the three exams that we've reviewed and you will notice nice, clear, simple development across those three, and also you will notice within yourself an increasing awareness of the language competences that are probably available for young learners in your classes. So here it is. I hope you enjoy it, and once again look forward to seeing you at the end. We are following the sequence that we have established with starters and movers. And what I'd like you to do here is look at this part of the exam and ask yourself the question, what can you do? Now, I know you will have really good ideas from the previous inputs. If you're not sure about how you adjust those for a slightly higher level, what you might do is pause the video and look at the extra resources we've provided you in terms of handbook and some such, and just check what the expectations are for this exam in terms of things like structures, grammar, and lexis. Once you've done that, if you need to, then answer the question, what can you do? And then we'll see how your ideas and ours develop in the next slides. I am sure your ideas on what you can do are developing really, really well. And here are a few that may or may not be as good as yours. So the first thing that we want to consider is getting the learners to look at the picture, and after they've looked at the picture, telling their partner what they think it is about. So attending to the picture, because we know in the exam there will be pictures. The pictures are there to help create context, to help create additional meaning, and being in the habit of looking at that will help in the exam. So that's number one. Number two is listen to the audio and make questions for your partner. So what we're looking for here is a fairly high level listening skill, which is processing what you hear and making questions. We know that making questions is harder than answering them, and this is what we want to do for the exam. Next thing we can do is listen to the audio and summarize it. So listen and then summarize for your partner what is happening or what happens. Yeah, so it's a more, once again, a more active approach to the listening. Next one is a little bit interesting, and it's to listen to the audio and see if you can describe the speaker. Now, the reason that we want to do that is it's easier to process information if you think you know who the speaker is. So some idea like, how old are they? Are they friendly? Where are they from? That sort of thing. And also in doing that now, we're developing a skill which is very useful for higher level exams when you really need to interpret more about why the speaker has the opinion that they have. So that's a really good thing to do. Last thing we can consider is listen to the audio and then decide what things you would like to change. And simple as that. Just listen to the audio and then tell your partner what you would like to change for any reason. So that's our first list, if you like, of example techniques for flyers. We need, of course, to remember that listening to general information, getting the general idea is very important, but also we need, because our students are language learners, we need to make sure that they are hearing all the words. So the simple task, very, very good one, listen and repeat what you hear. Of course, you check it, make sure they are repeating exactly what they hear, and then you know what they can improve on. Also, listen and transcribe. So listen and write down what you hear, good for building writing speed. Also very good for checking. So learners listen once, you stop it, and they have finished their writing. Then you play the audio again and let them do it again. And what you're trying to do is help them identify what kinds of words they are missing. Is it a vocabulary thing? Is it a grammar thing? Let them go through that to improve their listening skills. Third thing you can do is let the learners create a dialogue. Yeah, make their own dialogue while a third partner draws the line. Interesting because it requires greater verbal command, if you like, so learners become more engaged in the language which is being tested. Fourth thing you can do, of course, is just get the teacher and a learner to read a dialogue, hopefully a new one, that the other learners can listen to and draw the lines on. And let's, of course, not forget that we want to practice what actually happens in the exam, which is learners listen and draw lines. You will probably be a little bit familiar with this now, and that is number one, look at the picture. Look at the picture and tell your partner what you think it is about. You know why we're doing this, so no need to go over it. Second thing you can do is read the questions and guess the answers. So don't show the kids the prompts, just read the questions, guess the answers. Really good way of getting them to focus on the meaning. Third thing you can do, of course, is listen to the audio and then repeat out loud the answers as you hear them. So that's very rapid response, if you like. Fourth thing you can do is listen to the audio and write questions. After you've listened to the audio and written the questions, then of course you give them to your partner to answer. So here we're starting with a nice variation on what happens in a listening task. In this one, we get the learners to listen for answers. Yeah, and once they've written their answers, their partner needs to write the question. So that's really deep involvement, if you like, in both listening, identifying question types, and listening for those. So very, very cool task. The second thing you can do, which is I think something that you're very familiar with, is you get the students to ask the teacher questions, any question at all. So they listen to the audio. At the end, they ask the teacher the question, and you know what the teacher will do? The teacher will give the answer, and then if you've got students who have been paying attention in previous lessons, then they will ask, how do you know? Last thing you can do for this particular part of the test is listen, follow the transcript, and give your learners a particular task, which is to follow the words at exactly the same speed. You know why we're doing this. We're trying to build the connection, if you like, between what they see and what they hear with the help of the finger. I am sure that you have got lots of good ideas for what you can do with this. So here are a few more suggestions that hopefully will help in your process. So first suggestion is that you get your learners to look at the pictures. You may have a temptation to just look at the things, but do also look at the people, because there will be clues in who the people are and what the things are that will help your learners answer the questions. As always in listening, being aware of the detail in the question is very important. So lots of questions about the picture. Second thing you can do is listen and word count. You know the benefits in that. Next thing you can do is listen and transcribe. Next thing you can do is get your learners to listen to part of it and tell their partner what they have heard. It does not have to be exact words. It could just be meaning at this point, which is completely okay. Final thing you can do here is learners can listen and write questions. So some good suggestions, but there is more. Okay, so one thing we can't ignore is the question or the instruction. It's important that our learners process the meaning of the question or the meaning of the instruction. So you will give them one of those tasks from the VQL, which is what's another way to ask that. We don't want to allow the learners to generate lots of different ways to ask the question, but we do want them to process it so they're clearly focused on what the task is. So that's the first thing. Second thing we can do is transcription. Looking at the transcription, I mean, and getting learners to make questions. So that's a real positive. Next thing you can do is get the learners to look at the transcript and ask the teacher challenging questions. So any question they want, which means that they feel confident in their ability to explore things that perhaps they're not sure about. Next thing they can do is, of course, write answers that they have found in the text, and then they give those answers to their partners who are going to write the questions. So we start here by looking very closely at the pictures and asking partners a lot of detail about those, because we know that all those clues that are available we want to pay close attention to. Second thing we can do is we can read the questions out loud and have our partner repeat them. That means they are paying close attention to the question. Third thing we can do is listen to the text, and as we hear the answers, we can call them out loud. Fourth thing we can do is listen to answers from the teacher and write the questions. Fifth thing is we can do some finger follow with the transcript, always a benefit. And sixth thing, a relatively free task, is to listen to the audio and make questions. So in this little collection here, we've looked very carefully at the detail that's provided in the pictures, and we've also looked at getting the learners quite engaged in how they want to either make questions or process answers in the text. I am sure that almost immediately you have some really good ideas for this, so we'll go through a few simple ones. First one obviously is for the learners to describe what they can see in the picture with one another. Fairly straightforward. I can see la 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 la. Great. Second thing they can do is ask their partner questions about the picture. Questions about the people, questions about the things in the picture. That's really good because you're getting them to attend to any sense of narrative or broader information in that picture. Third thing they can do is describe the people and or things again in the picture and get their partner to color them. Yeah, so we're getting that awareness of the color vocab that can be used in this particular part of the exam. Fourth thing you can do, the obvious and the important one, is listen to it and repeat it. Now we move to the reading and writing part of the exam. Very exciting part actually, because there's a lot you can do here to develop your learners' reading and writing skills. And of course what you're doing when you look at this part of the exam is you're asking yourself the question, what can you do? Now, you probably want to have an increased awareness of what the grammar, what the structures, what the lexis is for this exam. So you might want to pause the video and go outside to the resources and see if you can think of clever ways of engaging your learners in their analysis of this part of the test. Okay, let's take some relatively simple tasks we can do with this. First thing you will do, obviously, is look very closely at the statements. Now, to get your learners really focused on the meaning of the statements, remove the options around the outside. So they're in the habit of thinking and processing meaning and not having a quick read and then a quick guess. You want them to pay close attention to each of those statements. So that's first thing you can do. Second thing you can do is get them to process those statements even more by asking one another, what's another way to say that? Yeah, so they're getting good attention to the statement there. Third thing you can do is get them into the habit of definitional language, if you like. So they write definitions for one another for many different things. The teacher monitors those, make sure they're formed correctly, as in the grammar is correct, make sure that the meaning is correct, and then of course they can share those with their partner. Clearly a lot of benefit in that in terms of learning to think how the examiner does, but also developing their writing skills in addition to the reading skills, which are tested more here. Last thing you might want to do is just do a quick spelling task, because even though those words round the outside are presented already, you want them to be aware of the fact that when they transcribe them, they have to transcribe them correctly. So get them to ask and answer with one another. How many letters, what's the first, what's the last, and so on. Let's start with what may not be the entirely obvious, and that is in this part of the exam there are lots of questions and learners have to think of probable answers, and the probable answers are listed. It's very tempting for us to look at a yes/no question and then look for an answer that is yes or no. In fact, that's not the case. What the exam is really looking for is awareness of the functions in language. So we need to have our learners very flexible in terms of their understanding of the meaning. So first thing we can do here is set up the reliable conveyor belt and get learners to just ask and answer with one another those questions. You need to make the point with them that you don't want just standard yes/no answers or answers to WH questions. You want them to have little conversations around each one of those prompts. So you broaden their awareness of what the possible answers can be. So that's the first thing to do. Second thing to do is make sure that when they come to this, in fact for every part of every exam, they're aware of the instructions. So for this part, get one learner to read the instructions and tell another what it is that they have to do, so they're very clear on that. Third thing you can do is get the learners to go through the text and choose their answers. So what do they think is a probably right answer? So you want them to choose what they are fairly confident of at this point. Never choose the hard answers first, yeah? If you choose the hard answer and you make a mistake, then you make two. Yeah, so choose what you think are the easier ones, and then after that, explain to your partner why you chose them. And of course, the next part is do the harder ones. After the harder ones are done, then you can get the learners asking or answering with one another why they chose an answer. Very important. Then you want to move on to the really important thing, which is the learners asking the teacher why he or she chose an answer. Not just the teacher telling the learner, but the learner or learners asking the teacher, and then the teacher explaining. Of course, when the teacher is explaining, the learners are listening very carefully for that model of thought. And if you can, get them to repeat what it is exactly that you have said, so that they're paying attention to both the meaning and the form. In this task, we're going to take two broadly different approaches. The first one we're going to do is look at the picture, get the learners to tell their partners what they can see, what can they learn from that scene about what the text might be about. After, after they've done that and they've got some good solid general idea, then you get them to fast finger read, not hugely fast, but fast enough so that they're really skipping over the gaps, yeah, so that they're getting the context, they're getting the meaning generally. Then we dive straight into the detail, because this is really important, and that is what kind of word goes in the gap. Yeah, so we've got some general idea of meaning, but now we want to look at the kind of word that goes in the gap. So is it going to be a noun or a verb or an adjective and so on? We want our learners to think in this part of the test very clearly about both meaning and grammar. When they've done that, of course, they will try and guess an answer from the list, and then after that they do something that you are going to expect. And of course, the thing that you expect is that the learners explain their choices to one another. And those choices are particularly in relation to meaning and the grammar. So you would expect them to be explaining why they chose something because it was a noun, why they chose something because it was an adjective, and so on. So they do that with one another. Then they get the opportunity to ask the teacher, and then of course the teacher explains their choices based on the overall context, based on the meaning within the sentence, and also based on the grammar. So the teacher there is providing a really good model. And of course, the last part of this section, which is what is the text about overall, that is a simple question with one another. What do you think it is all about and why? And then of course, going back to the teacher for the teacher's explanation for why they chose one particular statement as the best overall summary of the text. You will see already that there's a lot of similarity between this part of the test and the previous part 3. You will also see that you already have a great number of techniques that you can apply to this, and everything that has worked so far for part 3, part 2 will apply to this. So I'm trusting in your intelligence to be able to look at this and go ahead and make your own choices. Okay, we will start with what you know already, which is a sensible thing to do is, of course, check the instructions, make sure your learners know what to do with this part of the test. Then after that, do some quick reading following their finger. Now, we're not getting them to read too quickly, because it's not like we want them to avoid gaps, because there are no gaps. What we want them to do is get some general idea of the meaning. Once they've got the general idea of the meaning, then they can go to the next part, which is asking questions about the story, asking questions about the text. So good thing to do. Next thing is, of course, they can push the boundaries. They can ask the teacher challenging questions about the text. This gives them an opportunity to check things they're not sure of, also gives the teacher an opportunity to model some of the replies. Last part is the learners can say to the teacher, please ask me about blah, blah, blah. Please ask me about the castle, for example. Then the teacher asks questions about the castle. The learners listen to them, repeat them, and then answer them. So very nice close focus on the kinds of questions, the repetition of those questions, and then of course the formulation of the answer. When you look at the text and you look at the questions, you will notice that the phrasing in the questions is similar to, but not the same as, the language in the text. So we want the learners to be aware of that. So the exercise that they have done in the past, which is using the VQL, what's another way to say that, that becomes very useful at this point. So the learners can use their vocabulary question list and ask questions about the text and also the questions. What this should do for them is raise their awareness of how language in the text will be rephrased in the question. So you can work through this question list with them, which is, what is another way to say that? Can you define it? Lots and lots of different questions. So they're really processing the content of both the text and the questions. Okay, so at this point, it's probably time to do the questions, which is what the learners do. So they complete them, and then of course they tell their partner why they think it's the correct answer and where they found them. So that's a very good solid thing to do. Second thing they can do is, after they've answered the questions, they can ask the teacher for the teacher's answers and why the teacher thinks they're right and where they found them as well. So another pretty good task to do. Third thing they can do is take the text and see if they can write similar questions. So they write a question, put in a gap, and then share it with their partner, and then discuss the question and their answers together. This should really raise their awareness of what the question type is and what the question is looking for. So three fairly standard things to do here. First is look at the picture, ask and answer with their partners about the picture so that they get some processing time, they get some ideas that will help them with the meaning throughout the text. And then of course the quick finger read, once again, try to get them to just skip past those gaps, let their brains fill that in, so they read through to the end of the text with a quick finger read. Once they've done that, and based on what they have learned from the picture and from the quick read, then they can ask and answer with their partner questions about the text. At this point, they're not looking at answering by filling in the gaps, they're just looking at general meaning within the text. We're at the part of looking at closely at the grammar and the meaning in the text. So the learner chooses what they want to put in that gap, and then they explain it to their partner. And they have discussion or explanation around the meaning and the choice of grammar. And that's good. Then the learner can ask the teacher a question about an answer, like, for example, why did you choose that answer? The teacher can reply And then when the teacher replies, everyone's listening to that. Then the learner asks the same question of their partner to see if their partner can remodel, can repeat the language that the teacher has used. What we're trying to do here is get to the learner to think like the teacher does about the exam, to train their brains to offer the same explanation for why they made a choice in meaning and grammar. So we start with questions about the pictures because we want our learners to be aware of all the information in the pictures which they can use in their story. So with their partners, what's this, what's that, and so on. Once that's done, then they can start ask one another questions about a possible story. So what do you think here? What happens there? What happens then? And so on. So let them try and build a story through questions. Next thing they can do, of course, is they can take turnabout. So one person makes the first sentence of the story, second person makes the second sentence, and so on. So they build the story together. Another thing that they can do, which is interesting, is one person starts telling the story and the partner throws in one word. Could be any word. And then the partner takes that word, puts it in the story and continues. After they've told the story for a little bit, their partner throws in another word. What we're doing here is not trying to distract them, but develop their ability to be flexible in their storytelling. I'm sure you will have wonderful ideas about how you can develop writing here, and I'm sure they will be very, very good indeed. So just a few little suggestions here. First thing we can do is get our learners to develop their writing speed. So it's a kind of trick, if you like, in the sense that we tell them that the task is to write the story as quickly as they can. We're encouraging them to develop their writing fluency, as in writing speed. We're also trying to perhaps identify for them the kinds of errors they're making. But that's the next step, if you like. So they write them and then they record the number of words that they write in a few minutes. Yeah. So they've got a record of how many words they're doing. And then of course you can check that and check that as the days or weeks go by to see that they've improved. After they've written a story, of course, they give it to their partner, and then their partner will say what they like or don't like about it. Yeah, I like your story because, or I don't really like it because, and that's okay. Yeah. After they've done that, then we want to move into identifying potential problems with the story. So partners share their stories and they do things like find grammar or vocabulary that they think needs to be changed. So they work on that, they discuss it with one another, and of course you go around and monitor, give them advice so that they can improve their stories. The fourth point here, which is a very important one, is that, writing your own story as a kid is good. You will write a much better one if you have seen good models. So if, as the teacher, you've got the time, you should write a number of models and then let the kids look at your models, yeah, and share them with one another, why they like it, why they don't like it, language that they like, parts of it that they would like to use in their own stories. And that will mean that they're developing good language skills based on a good model. So now we've moved to the speaking part of the exam, and for each of these sections you will stop and think about what you can do. In this first part you're probably already making decisions, and here we have two different pictures and the child really has to talk about the differences. So I'm sure you've already got wonderful ideas, and we'll look at some more in the next slide. So when you look at those pictures, you're probably thinking, I know right away what the learners are going to do. And of course they are. They're going to start by asking and answering questions about what is in the picture. Yeah, or in the pictures. So what's this, what's that, what are these, and so on. So lots and lots of careful attention to things. So they're adjusted to what the task is. That's very important. After that, of course, you need the teacher's model. So the teacher can say, in this picture, la la la, or in my picture, la la la, in this picture, la la la, so that the kids are really aware of the language. And then, of course, once the teacher models, you know what happens, the kids repeat, because you want them to be aware of the structures that represent those differences. So the learners copy what the teacher has said, and that's very important that they're listening closely to that. But then after that, we need careful practice, careful manipulation in drills. So the teacher will, for example, from that picture, say, in my picture, there are 2 glasses of orange juice. And the kids repeat that, and then the teacher says 3. Yeah, and 4, and the kids do the substitution drill, or the teacher says no, and then the kids go, in my picture there are no glasses of orange juice, for example. So the teacher can do substitutions with nouns, substitutions with prepositions, so on, under, beside, and so on, and with color, size, and so on. So the teacher wants to do lots of substitution practice there. And of course, you know what comes after that. After the substitution practice, then the kids line up in conveyor belts, they get their pictures, they share them with one another, and they do that comparison. In mine there is this, in mine there is this, and that gives them lots and lots of good practice for this part of the exam. So you will know right away in this part of the exam that there's going to be lots of questions, and that's probably going to make you feel very happy, because with the style of teaching that you've been engaged in, you'll be asking lots of questions of your learners anyway, and they will be asking questions of one another. So this will not be too hard for them. You've got to bear in mind that there's a range of different questions here, so you should be fine if you're looking at the whole range of questions that we have built into this course, but try and look at WH questions, either or questions, yes, no questions, and then of course you as the teacher get to ask them, they get to answer them, they get to do that with one another. Of course you can drill any way you want to on that. After that's done, of course, you can get them to do mirror the English, and when they're mirroring, you're getting an opportunity for them to control the accuracy of their language. You will find, as always, when you have a group like that, that one person who is speaking, perhaps making mistakes, very likely will be corrected by the other kids. So everyone not only learns the right one, but is more aware of what they should be doing in the future. And of course, last thing you can do, which is kind of interesting, is get them to create their own version of this part of the test. So do a drawing or get some pictures and make their own grids, and then use that to practice with one another. Yes, it's all about questions at this point. So lots and lots of different questions like who is this? How old is he? What is he doing? How does he feel? She, of course, as well. But any question you can around the pictures in the story, because you really want to develop that. And the more developed the awareness is of the characters, what they're doing, um, what they're feeling, what they're going to do next, and so on, the more developed the story will be. So you know what you can do. You can ask all those questions. The learners can ask you. They can ask one another, and that's absolutely great. Then, of course, they will do the logical thing, which is they'll make a story with their partner. They can do the I make the first line, you make the sentence, really good practice like that. And then after that's done, what you want to do is move them into conveyor belts, because in the conveyor belt with different partners you get some natural language use, and that's what you want. You don't want them to be just reciting structures. You want them to be engaged in the delivery, and that's very likely if they're practicing with different people along the way. If you want at the end and you want to get really good accuracy, set up the mirror the English task so that they can listen to one another and monitor some of the potential problems with their language. You will of course be monitoring that and thinking carefully about the grammar, the structure, and the lexis in the syllabus that the examiner will be listening for. When you get to this part of the exam, my feeling is you will feel very comfortable as the teacher, because what is being assessed here is really what you've been teaching. So your classes that have been interactive, question focused, personal, meaningful, and those many other wonderful things you've got, all of those things are going to be tested in this part. Now, lots of things you can do, and I'm sure you've got a long list already, but I've got a couple more suggestions on the next slide, so maybe you'll pause before you get there. But the first hint for the next slide is model. So a really nice piece of entertainment here is you get the teacher at the front, that's you, and a student at the front, that's the candidate, and of course the teacher asks the questions. As soon as the teacher asks the question, everyone in the class copies what the teacher says, then the student replies because they're the candidate, and that's great. The learners have been listening carefully to the teacher, and that's very important that you listen carefully to the examiner. And so they've done that. Then of course you swap roles, yeah? So the teacher becomes the candidate and the learner becomes the examiner. So the learner asks the questions, the teacher answers, everyone in the class copies the teacher's reply. So at the end of that piece of practice, the learners have had practice in copying the examiner and copying the candidate. So that's really good. After you've done that, of course, you will be thinking conveyor belts, you'll be thinking mirror the English, and so on. But basically what you want to do there is give the learners lots and lots of opportunity to have easy, relaxed conversation with one another about their real lives, about their real days, their real family, and so on. So while this is for the exam, this practice should be an absolute delight. So as part of your final preparation, if you like, before the exam, and I know that you will have been through everything already, but always good to have that final review where you raise awareness of what could be in the exam. And of course the grammar and structures list, which you'll find in the handbook, which we have provided for you, will be a really good frame for organizing your review. You can, of course, work your way through it in whichever way you will, or what you can do is give it to your learners and give them some tasks with it. So for example, if there's a structure in the list that is a question, well then make the answer. If there is a structure which is an answer, well then make the question. If there are statements in there that you can make personal examples of, make personal examples of them. If there are structures there that you find a little bit challenging, memorize them. There's many, many more, and you can look back, if you like, to the recommendations we have in movers for what you can do with those structures. But essentially what you're doing is just getting your learners to heighten their awareness of the grammar and the structures before the exam. When it comes to reviewing the vocabulary, I think what you'll discover is you've done a lot of it already. But what you can do is, of course, use the vocabulary question list and give that to your learners. They should have it already, and they can ask and answer with the vocabulary question list. The really good thing about that is there's a lot of language use in it, so they're developing not only vocabulary awareness, but speaking and listening skills and refining meaning, refining grammar, and so on. So with this kind of list, they choose with their partner. They ask questions. If they want to challenge their partner, which they probably do, they're going to make the questions a little bit harder. If they think the word is hard to pronounce, they might ask their partner how to say it. If they think it's difficult in terms of meaning, they might say, what's another way to say it, or can you define it? If they want to be really detailed, they might ask about prefixes or suffixes and so on. So very useful to use that vocabulary question list as part of your review of the vocabulary before the exam. We also will provide for you a list of resources that you can use for flyers to ensure that you become a better teacher and your learners also do better in the exam. So that's it for flyers. I hope you have enjoyed what we've talked about today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.